So I apologize in advance for if my voice is a little off. I got sick over the weekend, there's not much I can do about it. But I gotta get this list out for you guys, so let's get it going. Hey everyone, CW Music Reviews here. I'm CWD, and this is gonna be the top 60 favorite albums of 2016 list. 2016, pretty much over at this point. I know some albums dropped at the last minute, namely Run the Jewels, and that's going to roll over into next year's list, unfortunately. These 60 albums that I listened to this year and enjoyed quite a bit. Some of them I reviewed, some of them I didn't have a chance to review, unfortunately. Now, two house rules for this list. One, it's not necessarily entirely concrete. Also, if an album does not make it on this list, I either didn't like the album enough, I didn't hear it, or I did hear it and I did like it quite a bit, but it was too late for me to put on the list since I wasn't able to listen to it enough times in order to fully have a cemented opinion about it. So with that in mind, let's get this on the road. I'm going to try to breeze through the first half of this list relatively briefly, so that way I can get to the other half in a little more detail. At number 60, we have the EP/mini album from Vince Staples, Prima Donna. At 59, Natasha Khan comes through with the project As Bad for Lashes about a concept album about a grieving bride called The Bride. At number 58, the Ice Age side project supergroup thing, Marching Church, puts out another solid album called Telling It Like It Is. At number 57, country legend Lucinda Williams proves that she's still got quite a bit of ambition with a double album, The Ghosts of Highway 20. At number 56, Common comes through with a more reinvigorated sound in light of the events of the election and this post-election world with the album Black America Again. At number 55, Russian Circles team up with Kurt Ballou to make a really good album for prog metal Guidance. At number 54, Clams Casino finally comes through with his debut album, and it's a solid one at that, with 32 levels. Number 53, an album that kind of fell off for me a lot, but I still like it quite a bit. Wow Nothing, Life of Pause, definitely a really good dream pop, psychedelic pop album if you're looking for something of that nature. At number 52, Weezer finally returned to form with their latest self-titled album, also known as The White Album. At number 51, Hudson Mohawk does the soundtrack for the latest game, Watch Dogs 2, and it surprisingly ended up being really good, really rhythm-driven. At number 50, Flatbush Zombies finally comes through with their debut record, and it's a trippy one and pretty cohesive one at that, 3001: A Laced Odyssey. At number 49, self-described cyberpunk band Pop 1280 comes through with a solid effort on their part with the album Paradise. And at number 48, Krallice dropped an album at the last minute, a set of 4 songs called Prelapsarian. At number 47, Red Hot Chili Peppers comes through with their latest album in about 5 years, with Danger Mouse as their producer and Josh Klinghoffer sounding a little more comfortable on guitar, The Getaway. At number 46, Absol drops one of the densest albums he's ever put out lyrically, Do Without Wilt. At number 45, Tobacco puts out a short, yet pretty immediate and hellish electronic album, Sweatbox Dynasty. At number 44, Clipping put out what is essentially a space opera set to the style of experimental hip-hop music, Splendor and Misery. And number 43, Animal Collective gets a bit more stripped back and more baroque with their latest album in a while, Painting With. At number 42, prolific producer Knowledge and rookie and up-and-coming MC/singer Anderson .Paak come together as No Worries for their debut album, Yes Lord! At number 41, A$AP Rock comes through with a set of his most personal, most therapeutic, and most accessible work to date with his latest album, The Impossible Kid. At number 40, Tim Hecker sounds even more jagged and even more off-kilter with his latest album in ambient and drone music, Love Streams. At number 39, Bad Bad Not Good put out their most experimental album to date, Bad Bad Not Good 4, aka their 4th album. At number 38, Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds comes through during a time of darkness for Nick Cave with a somewhat short, yet albeit lyrically and instrumentally crushing album, Skeleton Tree. At number 37, Mac Miller is in love and is introspective about that love with his latest album, The Divine Feminine. At number 36, after a name change from Viet Cong to Preoccupations, Preoccupations comes through with a solid effort, and I dare say an album that was much better than their debut, their self-titled record. At number 35, The Weeknd finally improves to the point where I can consider myself interested in what The Weeknd does with his latest album, Starboy. At number 34, prolific rock star Ty Segall comes through with a really twisted and particularly good album with Emotional Mugger. Very pleased with this album. I'm definitely looking forward to the new album he's going to come out with next month. And at number 33, Xenia Rubinos, an artist I had no familiarity with beforehand, comes through with a pretty solid project that's a mixture of like raw punk energy with some neo-soul and jazz and maybe elements of hip-hop through it, with the album Black Terry Cat. At number 32, Sturgill Simpson comes through with an album that seized me as a fan, someone that has been pretty skeptical of country music, with his latest album, A Sailor's Guide to Earth. Nice fusion of psych rock, southern rock, and country on his part. At number 31, Boris and Merzbow make two separate albums, and somehow was able to make the two come together and work separately and together all at once with their latest album, Ginsho. Do try to find a way to play both discs at the same time. You'll definitely get something out of it. And at number 30, Kendrick Lamar comes through with an album that proves that he is easily one of the greatest of all time with his latest mini-album / EP, Untitled Unmastered. Nice set of B-sides there, pretty much throwaway tracks from one of the greatest hip-hop albums of this decade, if not of all time, To Be Butterfly. Alright guys, we are halfway, so let's get into a little more detail. At number 29, Jeff Rosenstock comes through with a pretty anthemic and semi-conceptual release with his album Worry. The first half having a lot of solid songs to them and standalone tracks, whereas the second half kind of reminds me of the second half of the Abbey Road, where it was like a string of single songs that flowed into each other particularly well, and it's definitely one of the more unique rock releases of this year. At number 28, Beyonce, of all people, comes through with a really solid project with Lemonade. Definitely a narrative-driven album there, pretty much talking about infidelity as well as the suppression of the feminine voice, maybe. I had no anticipation for this thing. I was never actually a Beyonce fan before, but now that I've actually listened to it and taken in the compositions, I definitely can say that I'm going to be looking forward to what Beyonce is up to next. At number 27, doom, sludge, drone, experimental metal band The Body and Full of Hell, a grindcore band, come through with one of the most extreme, ear-searing projects I've heard in a while. One Day You Will Ache Like I Ache. It's pretty short, it was definitely a grower for me. Check it out. At number 26, Of Montreal proves that they are going through a type of stylistic insanity album after album after album with their latest album, Innocence Reaches. Going back to their more dance-driven roots, all the while taking in a lot of the experimental rock and all that nonsense with their new album, certainly. Do definitely check this out. I'm probably the only one that likes it a lot, but it's definitely worth a try. At number 25, noise rock, indie rock band Deerhoof come together with a really fun, really addictive album, The Magic. Lots of variety with this album, ranging from punk rock and Ink Spot's cover of all things, and definitely a lot of stuff to go around for everybody. At number 24, Anderson .Paak follows up on a series of features he did with Dr. Dre on his latest album. He follows up that with an album of his own. A really interesting display of neo-soul and hip-hop on this project, certainly. Lots of funny and witty lyrical moments. Lots of varied production on this album. I'm talking about Malibu. I'm definitely looking forward to what Anderson .Paak is going to do on a solo front next. At number 23, Death Grips puts out another album solidifying their consistency and solidifying their place as one of, if not the most original and innovative groups in music right now, Bottomless Pit. It's their most accessible since The Money Store, and it's definitely has an immediateness to it it definitely is well refined and in a lot of ways the best thing they put out so far. Not my favorite Death Grips album per se, but it's definitely up there for me. At number 22, Nicholas Jar, after 5 years of not having a studio album, discounting his EPs, discounting a couple of soundtracks he put out, comes together with a new album of 6 tracks where he pretty much proves that there is no limit to his creativity or his imagination. Whether it's fusing rock and roll vocal melodies with break beats, as well as fusing ambient music with Latin music, I'm definitely intrigued with what Nicholas Jar is doing, and I'm definitely going to be intrigued with what he's going to be doing in the future. In which case, I'm talking about the new album Sirens. Definitely check that out if you haven't yet. At number 21, Kanye West, before he went insane, was just merely on the stages and the brink of going insane. This is proved by this new album, The Life of Pablo. Some of the best Kanye has put out in a while. Definitely blows Yeezus right out of the water for sure. At number 20, like Mozart, David Bowie has conceived of his own Requiem, his own dirge, with his latest album, Black Star. Definitely a nice and warped fusion of some IDM, some jazz rock. Definitely a really cool experimental rock album, an art rock album, if you're into that sort of thing, certainly. It's also consequentially his magnum opus, since it sounds like that he was definitely going for a new stylistic direction that was probably going to be incredibly influential for the rock music of this decade, which is weird because Bowie's already done that sort of thing in previous decades. But it would have been interesting to see Bowie do this again within this decade, but that appears to have been cut short, unfortunately, and we are left with what is probably one of the best releases of this year, as well as the decade, and probably one of the best albums he's ever put out, period. At number 19, Schoolboy Q follows up on Oxymoron with probably his darkest and lyrically and sonically dense albums to date, Blank Face LP. It's not as conceptual as I would like it to be. There's definitely some conceptuality to the project, but it's not as fleshed out as I would have preferred it to be. But regardless, he comes through with, for the most part, a lot of solid and really great songs on this whole thing, pretty much taking kind of a horrorcore, kind of a West Coast G-Funk type thing, and pretty much making it his own and making it unique, which is something I would definitely expect from the West Coast. Definitely check this out if you've been following TDE for a little while and you are a big West Coast hip-hop kind of guy, you'll get something out of it. At number 18, Savages come out with their sophomore release, and in my opinion, their best release so far. And it's not so much that they went balls to the wall like with their debut Silence Yourself, and a lot of people are going to be disappointed just based on the fact that they're not, you know, getting all upfront and energetic like with their debut. But with this project, they're getting more lyrical, a little more abstract, a little more peculiar in terms of production, and you'll definitely find a lot that is a lot better than their debut, or at least in my opinion, you'll find a lot that's better on this album than their debut. I'm definitely going to be looking forward to what Savages are going to be doing next, since they seem to be on a winning streak right now, if you ask me. At number 17, Big Ups comes through with a really good sophomore release, Before a Million Universes, definitely embracing their Slint-ish vibe that they have kind of maybe touched on with their debut album, embracing more fully with this project, definitely. At the very least, it definitely proves that they can go from one dynamic to another at the flip of a hat, and it definitely is a roller coaster of an experience when you listen to track for track for track. If you're a big noise rock guy, a post-punk guy, a big punk rock guy, you'll definitely get something out of this album. At number 16, we have Autechre with their most dense and their most ambitious album to date, LSEC 1 through 5. You can interpret this as 5 albums or one whole album anthology that's pretty much just one album in total, but I like to see this as one single album. This thing is 4 hours long, and it is easily the most ambitious undertaking of mine in terms of reviewing. And for the most part, it's definitely a really good album. It's definitely pretty solid from front to back, which is surprising for an album of this particular length. Do definitely check this out if you're a big IDM guy, a glitch guy, a drone guy. If you like electronic music in general, there is definitely going to be something in this album for you. At number 15, Nails follows through with their best album to date, You Will Never Be One of Us. It's their longest album to date, clocking in at a little over 20 minutes, and there's just something about the viscera and the finesse that they have accumulated over the course of their career that I definitely picked up on and definitely enjoy a lot and return to quite often, even at its briefness, which isn't necessarily a bad thing for sure. If you're going to make a brief project, at least make most if not every single song as solid as humanly possible, and Nails have definitely done that with this project, even more so than their previous two efforts. At number 14, Headrest comes through with what I believe is an album of completely original songs under a label with a band backing it with their latest album, Teens of Denial. This thing gives me a lot of hope for indie rock right now. I feel like that now that this thing has come out, this thing is reaching so many ears as it is, I think that indie rock is going to go through this transition that was needed around the late 2000s when it started getting a lot more sugary, a lot more trendy per se. This thing isn't doing anything new per se, but given the progressive song structures, given the modernness of the lyricism, given the viscera, given the energy that is put into almost every single track here, it might as well be something new, because this is definitely a sound that is revitalized for sure. At number 13, A Tribe Called Quest comes through with their latest album in 20 years or so, and this album I wasn't having a lot of anticipation for. I thought they were just putting this out because Fife died and they wanted to make a few extra bucks. But no, this was something more than that. This was an album recorded whilst Fife was still alive. And you can definitely tell that from the modernness and the freshness of the lyricism and how modern and new and not dated at all sound all over the course of this album is. This is A Tribe Called Quest still being great during a decade where you'd expect them to be washed out, and honestly, it's probably one of the best comeback records in hip-hop. There are some modern guests here like Kendrick Lamar, Anderson .Paak. There's some production from Jack White on this project. Definitely an album you should check out if you're big into hip-hop, if you're looking for something that is conscious yet simultaneously still fun and varied. At number 12, Bright Eyes frontman Conor Oberst comes through with one of his better solo projects to date, Ruminations. Not an album that's doing a whole lot in terms of ambition. It's just namely 10 sets of songs that are stripped back and acoustic. Some of them with piano, some of them with acoustic guitar, a good chunk of them having harmonica. And it's Conor singing about lots of, like the album title says, ruminations. He definitely has a lot on his mind as he is trying to process, I guess, this health scare he had, and trying to process lots of things that he philosophically has been thinking about, and a lot of things in his life that are bothering him or anything of that nature. Definitely check this out if you're a big singer-songwriter guy, a folk rock guy. You'll definitely get something out of it. At number 11, this was supposed to be my favorite metal album of the year, but future releases after I reviewed this album and numerous listens after I have listened to this album, and it's kind of fallen off in favor. But this is still a pretty solid project and definitely deserving of its near approximation of the spot I would give it. I'm talking about the new Vektor album, Terminal Redux. Definitely a really good progressive metal, progressive thrash metal album that's set in space and this sci-fi space opera universe type thing about, I guess, a general that is looking for eternal youth or eternal life through this kind of mineral. Yeah, you'll definitely get something out of this if you're big into sci-fi stuff, if you're big into metal music, progressive rock and experimental rock, certainly. The middle does demand much more than it is giving, but still, this is definitely Vektor's best album to date, and I'm going to be looking forward to what it is they'll be dropping from the time to come. And now we have entered our top 10 favorite albums of the year. These projects, in my mind, stand out as some of the best, some of the most memorable, and some of the more solid and particularly great albums that came out this year in comparison to all the other ones that I have reviewed or haven't had a chance to review, but I still listen to, that are amongst this list particularly. Starting at number 10, we have the latest Metallica album, Hardwired to Self-Destruct. Some people were disappointed with this thing. I personally wasn't. It is semi-bloated, but I think that's in due to there being too much of a good thing, you know. Too much solid songs, too much solid and particularly cool riffs that Metallica was able to come up with. I think in the process of them trying to really win back their fan base, really remind people what it is that made Metallica great, they ended up giving too much, but still, there's still quite a few songs that I'm definitely in love with, at least 85-90% of the album, and that to me constitutes as a top 10 album to me. It's not my favorite metal album of the year, nor is it even my favorite Metallica album for sure, but this is definitely a release that has me incredibly hopeful for what Metallica has in store for music, even during a time when people thought Metallica would just be done by now. At number 9, this comes from an artist that I had no interest in whatsoever, but when I heard that he was going to stop rapping and start singing and start embracing a psychedelic funk sound, certainly, that intrigued me quite a bit, especially when I heard the initial singles to this project. And what he essentially came through with was this, like I said, a psychedelic neo-soul funk album that is fantastic. It definitely is consistent, it definitely is cohesive, and really accessible, and something that I will be returning to quite often. And it's so weird because we've known this guy more as a rapper, more as an actor, more as a producer than we have a singer and a sort of a composer in terms of creating his own art. I'm talking about the new Childish Gambino album, Awaken, My Love. Definitely a really good album if you're into funk music, soul music. Check this thing out if you haven't yet. At number 8, I had contemplated whether or not this would be my favorite electronic album of the year, and sure enough it has. It's just when I was thinking about Autechre, and when I was thinking about this album, I was thinking about what sounded the most innovative, what sounded the most fresh and particularly accessible. Which one was an album that I thought stood out in terms of greatness, in terms of creativity, and this one to me stood out a little more slightly than Autechre did. This thing comes from an electronic group that put out a single album in the early 2000s and has not put out anything else throughout the course of a decade and a half at least, and they've come through with one of the better comeback records of this year, if not the entirety of this decade. And this thing is colorful. It's definitely a really colorful, really ambitious undertaking for these guys, pretty much proving to the world that sample-based music can be great and should be defended in terms of like artistic integrity. Like, it's not so much stealing as it is taking a sound and doing something creative with it. It's definitely something that people should not bash as much as they do. Of course, I'm talking about the new Avalanches album, Wildflower. This thing is colorful, it's psychedelic, it's definitely a trip, a linear trip through this type of counterculturalist environment that they have created. At number 7, a Swans song, if you will, pretty much the last album to drop under this incarnation of this group. I gotta give it to Michael Gira for bringing the group back and coming through with a solid set of albums and ending on a really solid and climactic note with The Glowing Man. A solid set of 8 tracks, 119 minutes of music. This is an album that gives me some hope for post-rock in a time when post-rock has kind of been dying down in terms of relevance, in terms of consistency. Definitely check this thing out if you're a big experimental rock, post-rock, hell, if you just like rock music in general, you'll need to check this out. You'll definitely get something out of it. Because this thing proves that Swans, proves that Michael Gira have mastered the art of making cathartic music, have mastered bringing the listener to a state of enjoyable catharsis, and I just absolutely love it. At number 6, another Swans song album, but coming from the genre of metalcore this time. When I heard the first initial singles, I definitely had no reason to think that this would be less than solid, and sure enough, it was far beyond solid. It was fantastic. And unfortunately, this band is going to be breaking up soon, like with Swans, but this thing, it's a lot shorter, it's a lot more ambitious and experimental. It's like they knew that this was going to be their last album, so they pretty much went all out with all these different compositional and stylistic shifts in sound within the course of a 50 or so minute album, fusing some blues rock, some traditional pop in a sense, maybe some post-rock. There's even like an IDM instrumental that is on this particular album. And each one pretty much goes out without a hitch. This is definitely a band that is ending on their highest note instead of just continuing to put out albums only to see their projects kind of stagnate. And I think they're kind of self-conscious of that this time around. I'm talking about the Dillinger Escape Plan album, Dissociation. Definitely a really good album if you haven't tried it out yet. If you're a big metal guy, if you're a big hardcore punk guy or metalcore guy, definitely check this thing out. You'll dig it quite a bit. And now we have entered the top 5. Woo! At number 5, I gotta give it to King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, Nonagon Infinity. They have pretty much formulated an album that you can literally play forever. Now, granted, you can technically play any project forever. That's the beauty of these little devices now. You can put things on repeat, and they can play forever. But this is the only album I can think of in my mind that, in terms of composition, in terms of songwriting, it's literally designed to be played front to back, then all the way back to front, and then over and over and over again. This thing is a psychedelic garage rock suite that is infinitely replayable, and the sheer amount of ambition and meticulousness that was put into this thing, I just couldn't help but think that this is definitely top 10 material for me. This is definitely a highlight for rock music, and people need to pay more attention to this. And they will be paying attention to what King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard is coming out with in the future, because I think they have like 4 albums coming out this coming year. But in the meantime, we are left with the sole release of King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard this year, and it definitely shows quite a bit of ambition and quite a bit of promise for these guys, and I'm definitely going to be looking forward to every single project they're going to put out next year. At number 4, my pick for hip-hop album of the year, there just isn't a single hip-hop album in my mind that has been doing anything this unique, this off-kilter, this particularly strange that came out this year, and I gotta give it to my boy Danny Brown, the Atrocity Exhibition. With this album, it definitely proves that Danny Brown can literally rap over anything, about anything. Whether it's some like weird industrial blackened trap thing that is pneumonia, or like these straight up abrasive MIDI horns, he definitely proves that he can demonstrate a lot of energy, a lot of charisma, and definitely a lot of ability over things that you would not think any human being could flow over as seamlessly as he does on this album. He does have a high-pitched voice a lot of the time, but I find it to be kind of this part of a Jekyll and Hyde thing that Danny Brown has going on, and this Hyde is pretty much taking over on this album. And number 3, if they ever do a musical remake of Dante's Inferno for metal music, then I would say that this band needs to be in charge of it. These guys are pretty much doing what they've always done. They're making cerebral, emotionally stirring and eerie metal music in the form of this drony, doomish, and noise type thing. But this time around, they're fusing elements of pop music with this album in an attempt to make what they have described as the grossest pop album of all time. And they definitely do that quite well with some 808 drums, the addition of some female vocalists, some synth certainly, some verse-chorus-verse moments on this album quite a bit. They definitely have not just come up with one of the most ambitious and experimental metal albums to date in recent memory, but in my head, my favorite metal album of the year. I'm talking about the new album from The Body, No One Deserves Happiness. This thing grew on me a lot, and I did not anticipate for such a thing to happen. And number 2, this is actually the second of 2 albums this artist has dropped this year within the same vicinity of each other. The first one I thought was cool, but I didn't really see a lot of reason to return to it. The visual effects of this particular project, that didn't particularly interest me all that much, unfortunately, but this second album, whew, he definitely outdone himself. And this album pretty much proves that you don't need to come out with an album once every year. You know, you're not obligated to any single fan base or any person to keep dropping albums within weeks, within months, or within just a year of each other. Take your time with your art. If it takes you 4 years to drop what is easily the best R&B, best pop album of this year, one of the greatest albums, not just of this decade, but all time, then so be it. Just take your time. Of course, I'm talking about the new Frank Ocean album, Blonde. Very nice, solid fusion of this R&B sound with like elements of maybe some indie rock, some shoegaze. There's just a lot of sounds that Frank was able to infuse into 1 hour of music, and he definitely has a lot of things to say in this age of internet isolationism. A nice burning torch album, certainly, and there's a few surprises here and there if you haven't listened to this thing yet. Maybe not my favorite album of the year, but I can definitely agree with some people that it might just be the best. And my number 1 favorite album of the year. I gotta give it to this group for definitely putting out what is easily one of the most melancholy releases to date from these guys and from this year alone, even from music itself. I gotta give it to this group for finally coming through with an album that proves to people that they're not washed out, they're not done, they still have a lot of tricks up their sleeves for the genre of experimental rock. And I gotta give it to this album for sticking this close to me as it has when it comes to making music that stirs up a lot of emotions within me. This isn't just my favorite album of the year or one of my favorite albums of the decade, but definitely my top 3 of one of the best things that they have dropped, like, in ever. And they didn't really do all that much different from what they've been doing. They pretty much just looked back and was able to refine these tracks, these ideas that they have come up with before, and really updated them for now. They really were able to capture an emotional energy within each individual track here that numerous bands, numerous artists wish they could achieve. I gotta give it to Radiohead for putting out A Moon-Shaped Pool. Maybe not the most agonizing release emotionally this year. There are definitely some that maybe kind of one up on the agonizing front. But this is definitely one of the moodiest and easily one of the most emotionally stirring albums in terms of lyricism, and even at times instrumentation, definitely instrumentation for a lot of moments. So those are my favorite albums of this year. Definitely a really good year for music, even if we've lost quite a few of music's most influential individuals. Even if some genres haven't exactly had a lot of output as I would like. What did you think of any of these 60 albums? Did you like any of them? Did you dislike any of them? I'm sure you probably disliked quite a few of them. What were some of your favorite albums of this year? And what albums are you looking forward to listening to next year? The CW Music Reviews here, signing off.